Thanks for tuning in today to Front Porch Conversations. We are here today on the porch at the Copeland Community Center. And I'm told that technically this is a front porch because if you have a home or a building on the river, the front is always the river. So we are on the front porch of the Copeland Community Center. It's my pleasure to have with us today Phyllis Rand. Phyllis, welcome.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining me on the front porch in the rocking chairs. Isn't this neat?
It's great, and it's a wonderful day. And you masterminded this whole idea of the front porch conversations.
Tom and I did, yes.
Tom, well, it's a great
Tom
idea.
who is behind the camera right now.
Yeah, it's a great
I
idea.
had epiphany. And epiphany is when God talks to you.
Yeah. Well, it's a great idea. And thanks for inviting me.
Our pleasure. I believe you're fairly new to the village, so would you tell us when you moved and where you live?
Well, yes, I am fairly new. I moved last August. August 16th was my first day here. Unpacked. A lot of friends helpfully came and helped me unpack. So not quite a year I've been here.
And where do you live in the village?
I live in Riverwoods. I live in one of those nice little, they call them zero lot houses. The last one that was built is mine.
Great. Well, welcome again.
Thank you.
Phyllis, would you tell our viewers where you were born and a little bit about your early childhood?
Oh, okay. Well, until I graduated college, I was a New Englander. All my growing up years were there. I was born in Hartford, Connecticut. But before I started school, my grandfather really wanted Dad to come back to help him on the farm. So we went back to northern Maine, and that's where I started school. So I grew up in a little town called Ashland, Maine, not too far from Canada, very northern part of Maine. Not the kind of Maine you think of with the lobster and the ocean and so forth, but it was Maine. And that's where I went to elementary school, high school, and left there for college and never went back to live there. But it was there that a lot of big decisions were made in my life. I grew up in the Advent Christian Church in Ashland. My parents and grandparents had a long history there. It was at Camp Namaca that I gave my life to the Lord. And by the way, that's a funny name, Camp Namaca. I recently graduated. I recently retired. Chaplain at Good Sam was the pastor. Jack Jones was the pastor at Ashland when I left for college. And he's the one that actually named Camp Namaca.
And what was the origin of the name?
Northern Maine Advent Christian Camp Meeting Association. Namaca, I guess you could, yeah.
A lot of summer camps have names after Indians, and I thought, well, I've never heard of that tribe.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of Indians from up in Maine, and I guess that was part of his inspiration to make it sound like an Indian name. But yeah, I was there at camp when I was 9 years old that I gave my life to the Lord. And I remember before I went to college, I was encouraged to tell the Lord that my life was His to do with, and would He please guide me. And I did that, and I will tell you that my life has been an example of God's goodness. He has led me and guided me, and I'm so grateful. But anyway, I grew up on a farm and had all the carefree life of a farm girl.
And did you work when you were in school or high school?
Just to help Dad. I didn't work for a paying job, but I didn't do that till I went to college. Mm-hmm.
Well, I had a conversation yesterday by phone with somebody that you went to camp with.
Oh, really?
And that was Dee Dee Stoddard.
Dee Dee, sure. She grew up just down the river, actually, in a little town, and knew her, yes, when we were younger.
For our viewers who may not know the name Dee Dee Stoddard, she was for a number of years the Director of Social Services here. And when she retired, she moved back to Maine.
Yes. Yeah.
So she wanted me to say hello
Well,
to you
thank you.
and to everybody else watching.
And when you said that, you know who I thought you were going to say is the pastor's wife, Lee. I was her counselor at camp
Oh my goodness.
when I was in college. So
Well, that's one of the fascinating things to me about Advent Christian Village is watching all these interconnections return. You know, people you
Yeah.
may not have seen in 20, 40, 30
Love it.
years. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that drew me. My intention was never to retire, actually, and never to come here, but through friends and, of course, the Lord's leading, I feel I'm where I should be.
As a child, was the farm a fun place to grow up?
Well, in retrospect, we were somewhat isolated, but had cousins that lived across this road in the adjoining farm. And town was 3 miles away. So, but now that I look back on it, I think, what a great life for a child. We called it walking out back. You know, Grandpa and Dad had cleared land, and we'd walk out there through the woods and see all kinds of animals, pick strawberries, and your life was pretty much, as I said, carefree. I do love it in retrospect, especially.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Berkshire Christian College, and it's lovely for me here that I have so many friends that were classmates at the same time, and that was one of the draws. And I would come and visit them and think, you know, it'd be lovely to spend more time with them, and here I am, so, yeah.
And then through the years you came to visit because your parents came here,
Well,
right?
yes. My parents spent their last years here, living in an apartment and then at Good Sam. And I lived in Pensacola. And so it was the first time that I had ever lived near enough to my parents to regularly visit them. And so I was here a lot and checked up on them. Yeah.
Well, tell us, after you went to Berkshire and 4 years?
Yes, I did. I went to Berkshire, got my degree, and was pretty uncertain about what the next step in my life would be. It's not unusual for college graduates to think, now what? But I was thinking of this the other day. You know, a friend at school who had at one point been a roommate gave me a verse. And she said, here's a verse you can use. And it was from Psalms. And David said, thou wilt show me the path of life. In thy presence is fullness of joy. And I thought, well, there you go. I'm just going to trust God to show me the path of life and trust that I'm going to be very happy in it. So my last semester, I took a teaching internship. I was encouraged to do it, so I did it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll teach. I was open to it. And a teacher in one of my classes, in a philosophy of education class, said to me, I'm going to let you miss class today and go interview with somebody. Okay. And I interviewed with a man from Florida who was recruiting teachers for a Christian school in Pensacola, Florida. And to tell you the truth, I didn't even know there were Christian day schools. There were none where I was from. There was Christian college, but no day schools. So 4 of us said, okay, you know, let's go. So we ended up going down to Pensacola, Florida. I signed a contract to teach there for 2 years. And 50 years later, I retired. But here's something funny. When Dr. Horton, Arlen Horton, recruited me, he sent me a contract and it said, you may teach anywhere from grades 7 through 12. Well, I had told him I'd be a high school teacher. And I thought, that man is going to put me in 6th grade. I know it. So I asked my teacher to write him and say, it would be a big mistake to put Phyllis in elementary. She doesn't, no. Anyway, when I got there, I was teaching 6th grade. So getting older gives you perspective, and you look back at it and you think, that was the Lord's doing. You know, he's leading you along the way, doing what you need to do to get to a point where you thought you'd be at the beginning. So, yeah, I taught 6th grade when I first went there.
And did that help inform you about how to be a better teacher, do you think?
Oh, of course it did. Of course it did. When I first went there, it was called Pensacola Christian School. It had been founded in 1954, and I went in 1969. But already there were thousands of students. It's a wonderful ministry. It's just, I've often said, it was such a blessing to work at a place where there was no human explanation for it. I mean, everybody worked hard, but it was just God's goodness and blessing. I told a friend the other day, I kind of feel that way about here, too. You know, it's just God's wonderful blessing.
Had you ever been to Florida before?
I had been to Florida one time, and it's when I was in college. I went on a choir tour, and actually we came here and gave a concert. And the chapel had just been built, and we sang in the chapel and thought it was very beautiful. Yeah. So, yeah, that was the only time. And I felt so out of my element when I first came. The humidity, I mean, I thought, I'll never breathe again, you know. And I distinctly remember seeing my first cockroach. I was unpacking my books, you know, they pack them up at the end of the day, and out popped this thing like this. So anyway, and teaching and the structure of it, the business of it. But the Lord worked in my heart because it was not as much the humidity, it was my attitude that needed to be straightened out, you know, so, yeah.
Yeah, and the humidity probably wasn't going to change anyway.
No, it didn't change.
Well, the first winter you were in Florida, and you saw the news of what the weather was back home. Were you happy?
Oh, well,
or did you miss
not
the
right at first, no. I missed the seasons, and, you know, but for the first 3 years I was there, I never went back to Maine. We didn't have a big salary. You know, when things are starting out, you just get what you can. The only income was tuition, and you had to build a school. But here's a blessing. My sister Linda, I have 2 sisters and a brother. My sister Linda married Dick Russell, and he was a pastor. And they had a pastorate in Waycross, Georgia, which I understand has a connection with the village because the Carters went to that church. So I rode the bus up there. And I guess as the crow flies, it wasn't that far away, but it took me a whole day to ride the bus up to Waycross, Georgia. We stopped at every farm and everywhere. So I got to spend Christmas with Linda. That was a blessing. And to add to that story, guess where they live now?
Around the corner.
Around the corner. I know. They moved here at Christmas, so that's great.
So you got to spend another Christmas
I
with her.
did. I spent Christmas with her. Yeah. It's wonderful.
Was there anything after you got moved to the village that surprised you about the village?
Well, I guess not really. I feel as if I knew it pretty well, but I'll share a blessing with you. You know, I told you for 50 years I worked in Pensacola, and I went from grade school to being a vice principal to the whole time I was there I was studying. The irony is when you're a teacher you have to keep going to school. So I got a couple more masters and a doctorate degree, and I eventually was in the college and was the dean of education at the college. But way back in the 80s, another sixth grade teacher and I shared an apartment. And guess where she lives now?
Here?
She does. She lives here. She and her husband retired here. She has absolutely no connections with this ministry, with this denomination, nothing. So the Lord just gave me a connection here that I wasn't anticipating. But she used to, she and her husband lived in Clearwater after she married. And sometimes we'd get together here, because halfway I'd come over, she'd come up, and we'd meet, stay in the lodge, visit, and so forth. And now she lives here. It's just amazing. And it's another, to me, a gift. God has given me so many gifts, you know, undeservedly so, but it's as if my two worlds are connecting again here. Mm-hmm. Because I have connections from my life in Pensacola, and all my connections from Berkshire and here and family. It's just a wonderful amalgamation of all these connections. I love it.
And who is that former?
Her name is Judy Fornash, Judy and Bruce. They live down on Millsite Lane. And she's still working. She teaches the little Christian school in town. She's amazing.
Well, it's amazing how our paths cross.
It is.
Over and over. Phyllis, share with us a little bit about your work through the 50 years of one employer and how the program grew in the college and the things you've done there.
Yes, well, I'll tell you. It's nothing I imagined, nothing I set out to do. Again, it was God's leading. And so when young people tell me, I don't know what I'm going to do, I said, just tell God to do it for you. Let him lead you and direct you. And he will. He takes that seriously when you tell him that you're open to what he wants you to do and that you really will be happy. So I kind of mentioned this, but I had taught there for 4 years in 6th grade. And Dr. Horton called me and said, would you go back to college and get another degree, start working on advanced degrees, because the Lord's leading us to start a college. And so remember, I had told him, I had my teacher tell him, don't put her in elementary, she doesn't know how to handle kids, da, da, da. Well, so here's an opportunity to go with older ones. So I was going to school. I took a year off from teaching. I was working at a local university, West Florida. And Dr. Horton called me and said, well, we have a vacancy in administration in the elementary and we want you to come back. So I did, and I did that for probably 15 years. But while I was doing that, I was continuing with education. And when I got one master's, I started teaching lower, freshman courses at the college. English courses, literature and grammar and so forth. Meanwhile, I kept studying. I got another degree in education, one in English education, one in elementary education, and eventually became the dean of education. Again, none of my planning. So, and that was just such a privilege to do it, and I loved it. But the thing, here's something that it's just thrilling to me. When the year before I came here, to Pensacola, I came there, I was working in a potato factory. And it was pretty tedious work, picking out rotten potatoes or whatever. And I would imagine what the Lord might have for me to do. And at the time I thought, wouldn't it be great if I got to write? And I didn't know what, write what, I don't know. But I thought, well, maybe for a magazine. That sounded interesting to me. But one thing I got to do was be part of the beginning of the publishing ministry at this college. And I got to write. I don't know if you've ever heard of Rebecca Publications.
Through you, yes.
Through me, yeah. Well, they're the largest now. Again, God's blessing. Because all he had was us to work with, but he helped us. And so I got to write a lot of books for that. Wonderful opportunity. And then, when I felt it was time for me to step back from administration and classroom teaching, guess what I was asked to do? Work in a magazine. Isn't that something? All those years back then, God just put it in my head, and I felt, what a way to end your working career doing exactly what you thought would be an interesting thing to do. So,
And I think you brought some
yeah,
examples.
I did. Look at it's called a Becca Amazing. It's a takeoff on a Becca, and our motto was, "We make it easy so you can make it amazing." It's good, isn't it?
That is very good.
And we do one for Christian schools for teachers and one for homeschool. And I thought you'd be interested to know that in this last homeschool one, my cousin and her family were highlighted. Christy Libby, is a missionary in Mexico. She lives in San Diego, but her children use a Becca Academy, which is streaming lessons for their school so that they can go with their parents on trips and so forth. So she made it. So I was real proud of that. And one thing, I think a lot of people here watch Rejoice in the Lord.
Sure.
Yeah, because some people have said to me, "Oh, we watch your show, my show." You know, it's just the church, the campus church, it's called. And Dr. Horton asked me to write a book about the ministry, how it was started. And so I got to do that. It's called Builders of the Dream. That was a real opportunity, a blessing. And yesterday I got a copy of the Summit catalog from the college, and I've been privileged. I got it because I was privileged to be invited to be a board member.
Wonderful.
So I got a copy of that. So I still feel as if I'm having a part in the school and the ministry I was involved in so long.
And when we talked the other day about trying to figure out when we could get together, you said, "Well, I can't do it at a certain time because I have a conference call as a board member."
Yes, right.
And so will that be how they do all their board meetings, or is that only
Well,
for
that's
this
the
time?
first one. We don't usually have to have so many, but as you can imagine, it's kind of a difficult time right now. So a lot of new things, a lot of big decisions. We need the Lord's guidance on what to do. We don't know when we'll go back in full swing or anything. So
Right.
same with this ministry, I'm sure. Craig is just needing God's daily guidance because of the circumstances.
I think as we all are.
Yes.
But I don't know that that's different. But
Yeah.
probably it's a lot more in people's forefront of their
There you go.
minds at this
There
point.
you go. Yeah.
I know that through the years you've given a lot of advice to young people. But what would you, for our audience today, share as advice for a young person?
Well, I think it'd just go back to my own experience, which is give your life to God. He has the perfect plan for it. And then just remind yourself daily that God's leading you on a path. He has a path for you, and He's working it out. It can be very troublesome sometimes when you worry about what the next step is and what's going to happen if and so forth. Then life is so much better when you trust God. It really is.
And obviously you've trusted God and He's led you.
Well, my testimony is God's good. He's helped me so many ways, given me a wonderful career and friends and purpose. It's been great.
And where do you think God's leading you now in this phase of your life?
Well, I'm waiting for Him to show me exactly. I'm hoping that I still have a purpose.
Definitely.
Yes. So I'm open to what He might have for me.
And you found that you're around people you've known a long time here as well,
Yes, I
and getting
love
to know
it.
new people.
Getting to know new people. I am constantly amazed that I meet so many people from Maine. And we have connections. I didn't know them before, but it's easy to find a connection. And of course, I have family, and I have a cousin here, 2 cousins. One is not a member of the village, but I found out he lives in Live Oak. Surprise, surprise. And of course, my sister and brother-in-law and friends, college friends.
Well, during this interview here today, I think we've discovered another new place to gather. This porch has not evidently been used a lot, but I would suggest to anybody who wants to just come and rock and listen to the birds like we are today, or listen to the wind through the trees, it's a beautiful time in God's creation. Phyllis, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's been fun. Thank you.